Tonight on PrimeTime Politics, looking for a majority. 3 by-elections are happening tonight, and by the end, the governing Liberals could get their desired majority. Coming up, we'll examine the races and zoom in on the Montreal riding of Terrebonne, where the closest race is expected to happen. Also, what would a majority mean for government policy? What would it mean for major projects? We'll speak to Liberal strategist Michele Cadario. And we'll hear from senior Liberals on what could be a very long night. This is PrimeTime Politics. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Serapio. Well, within the next few hours, we will know whether the Carney government has secured a Liberal majority. At the time of this broadcast, all final ballots are now being cast in 3 by-elections, 2 in Toronto, 1 in Montreal. Now, as it stands, the Liberals are just 1 seat shy of a majority, aided by the floor crossings of 5 MPs, 4 former Conservatives, and 1 former New Democrat. That brings the Liberal count in the Commons to 171. 172 would give the Carney Liberals a technical majority, but the party would need at least 173 to actually govern like one. And that's because the Speaker is a Liberal MP. And as the Speaker, Francis Scarpaleggia, only votes in case of a tie, which explains why tonight's 3 by-elections are being watched very closely, because if the Liberals win at least 2 of tonight's 3 races, well, the calculus in the House and in committees will completely change. Now, the tightest of tonight's 3 races is expected to be the vote in the Montreal riding of Terrebonne. You see there the candidates, at least those with representation in the House ready, their parties. There are 48 candidates in total running, but the ones we're really watching out for tonight are Nathalie Sinclair-Desgagnés from the Bloc Québécois and Tatiana Auguste from the Liberal Party. And to talk about this, we're now joined in Montreal by Martin Patriquin, Quebec correspondent for the Logic, and in Ottawa, polls analyst Éric Grenier, founder and writer of the Writ. Hello to you both.
Hello.
Hey there, how you doing, Michael?
I'm good. Good to see you. Listen, Martin, I'm going to actually begin with you because Terrebonne, for people who know, did go back and forth in last year's election. Eventually, it was declared a Liberal win by 1 vote. So how much of a nail-biter do you think it's going to be tonight?
I think it's going to be, I think the Liberals are going to win, frankly. And for a variety of reasons that we can get into. But I think it's going to be, I think it'll be closer than put it this way, I think it's going to be closer than the ones in Ontario, which are pretty safe Liberal seats. The interesting thing for me is, like, everybody talks about that 1 vote win, which is probably the closest election we've ever had in this country. But people don't talk about so much what Tatiana Auguste's, what she did in 2025. There was a 9-point swing from the Bloc Québécois, from other parties to the Liberals in 2025, which shows me that the party has a lot of momentum in there. And I think that's something that they're going to be able to build on tonight. And probably take 3 of 3 of the by-elections coming up.
Okay, is it that momentum that you point to that leads you to conclude that the Liberals are going to win this by-election?
Well, it's momentum. It's also, look, the Liberals by-elections sort of as a rule are generally like that people there's not a ton of a participation. This has been interesting because there's actually been a sizable pre-vote to it, upwards of 20%, if I'm not mistaken. But what's interesting, so obviously what's really important in by-elections is get at the vote. And what the Liberals have been able to do, just because of the laws as they stand with Elections Canada, is there are 3 by-elections, and it's allowed the Liberals to basically pool the money from all 3 by-elections into 1 riding if they felt like it, which is exactly what they've done. They've taken the money from the safe seats in Ontario and basically poured it into here for their ground game. The other aspect of it too is, poll after poll says that the majority of Canadians want a Liberal majority, and that very much includes Quebec. There are obviously, these are by-elections, there are always sort of like local issues that come up. For example, high-speed rail, the fact that the high-speed rail, the trajectory of the route, it doesn't stop in Terrebonne, which is one of the fastest growing communities in Quebec, and that's one of the issues. But I think overall, I think this is basically I hate to use the word, but almost a referendum on the Liberal government as it stands so far. And it stands that Mr. Carney was elected basically by Quebecers because he was seen as the best sort of a wall against Donald Trump in the United States. And what was true in 2025 has by and large remained true today. So I think for all those reasons, I think the Liberals are going to do quite well tonight.
Okay, you mentioned polls, and with that, I'm going to bring in Éric Grenier here. So Éric, when you look at the numbers right now, what do they tell us? Because, demographically, historically, Terrebonne is not one that has supported the Liberals greatly in the past.
No, not at all. The Liberals won it in 2025, and it was the first time they had done so since 1980, when Pierre Trudeau won everything except one seat in Quebec. What I think is going to be really interesting about the results tonight is that based on the polls, it should remain as close as it was last time. The Liberals have about as much support as they did in Quebec in the last election. The Bloc still has about as much support as they did in the last election. So based on that, you would expect that it would still be a toss-up. So if we do end up seeing, as Marty says, that the Liberals could win this, especially based on all of the organization they put in, just the general narrative right now about the need for a majority government, or the fact that the Liberals are much more popular nationwide than they were in the last election. If we do see that the Liberals end up winning this by more than one vote, and I mean like a significantly larger margin than that, then that would suggest that all those factors played a difference. If instead we do see that it ends up being just as tight as it was in the last election, then it would suggest that the voters in the riding were voting largely along the lines of what the national trends have been. So I think that'll be the interesting thing to see, and Terrebonne will really be a good gauge of where people are now and how they kind of view the Carney government, because it is the same two major candidates, the same major two parties are in contention, unlike in Toronto.
Okay, so safe to say you think it's going to be tight?
I think that it could be tight. I think that's the big thing here. If I had to put some money down on it, and I wouldn't do that, I would probably go more where Marty is, that the Liberals would have the advantage. But again, this is a riding that is very francophone. It's not very diverse. For that reason, it is still a very good stronghold for that nationalist sovereignist vote that the Bloc has counted on in the past.
Okay, don't put money on it, because we're journalists. We don't make that much money. So listen, Martin, how important is a win in Terrebonne for the Bloc, for the Liberals? How important is it to actually take this riding, do you think, for the parties?
I think for the Bloc, it's basically for the same reasons that it's always important, is that they're a bulwark party. They're like, we best represent Quebec. So every time that they win, they get to add to that argument. Every time they lose, they take away from that argument. Losing this would be significant for them. As Éric mentioned, this is a fairly francophone, very francophone riding. The difference is there's the one thing that I think that mitigates that a little bit, and what puts it in the Liberals' favor, is that there's been massive population increase in Terrebonne over the last 15, 20 years, in part because of urban flight. People, for whatever reason, I haven't figured out why yet, want to leave Montreal and go elsewhere. One of the net beneficiaries of that has been Terrebonne. The other thing, too, that you've seen, that includes recent immigrants. So a significant size of the immigrant population. So it's while Éric is right, it's not the most diverse place on the planet. It is far more diverse today than it was even 6 or 7 years ago. Along those lines, at the very least, even if the Liberals don't pull it out tonight, sorry, I just had a call come in. That's obnoxious. Even if the Liberals don't pull it off tonight, middle and long term, I think the Liberals are much better poised in that area and the areas around it. Look, that all over the North Shore, this is happening everywhere. It's beneficial to parties where immigration is seen as a positive, not a net negative.
Okay. Listen, before you both go, I also want to get your thoughts on Quebec's new Premier, Christine Fréchette, elected yesterday to replace François Legault as leader of the Coalition Avenir Québec. She's the former Quebec Minister for the Economy, focused much of her talk last night on securing Quebec's economic future, also accusing the Parti Québécois and the Quebec Liberal Party of reviving old constitutional squabbles. I think right now the CAQ is running fourth in public opinion polls. Does Fréchette's addition or entrance as leader of that party change any type of the calculus for you, Marty?
It does. For the CAQ, or the Coalition Avenir Québec, it is better for them. She is better placed to win more votes than Bernard Drainville, her competitor. She first of all, name recognition. She's very, very well known outside the party. Not to say Bernard Drainville isn't as well, but in a good way, if I can put it this way, in a good way, she's seen as much more of a positive force within the party by Quebecers at large than Bernard Drainville was. What that means that she's probably going to be stealing nationalist votes and federalist votes. So the fact that she was elected brings the CAQ into play once again. And exactly how those votes split in the next election in October will probably decide as to who's going to be the next party. The interesting thing to me is I don't think she's going to win. I think she's a better chance of winning, but I don't think she's going to win. But I think the CAQ is suddenly very much a spoiler in a race that was pretty much a two-horse race, 3 or 4 days ago.
Éric, what do you make of the result?
Yeah, I think that what she does is that she gives the CAQ a chance of surviving this election. And Drainville, from the polls that we saw, would have put the party not fourth but fifth, and almost certainly would have wiped the party off of the electoral map. With Fréchette, the CAQ is more competitive, but they're still not very much in the race. They have half the support of either the Liberals or the PQ. But as Marty says, what's interesting about them is that unlike Drainville, which would have really pushed voters to the Liberals, not really helped out the Parti québécois. Fréchette is more on the federalist kind of economic side of the debate, where Drainville was more on the identity nationalist side of things. I think that what we could see is that the Liberals now have a little bit more competition for that vote that doesn't want a referendum, but does just kind of want economic stewardship of the province. I still think that it is a two-party race. The CQ at best is at least competitive. They're in the race in the sense that they could win some seats, but Fréchette has a huge margin to overcome to even get into the running to hope for being reelected. I think the odds are she'll be a premier for about 6 months. But at least she gives the CAQ a chance to live to see another day, because they were on track to going down to 0 seats and probably going extinct.
Okay, well, the Quebec provincial election not till the fall, and of course the by-elections are this evening. We're going to watch those very closely. Martin, Éric, thank you for this. Appreciate the time this evening.
All right, thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Michael.
Okay, let's talk a bit more about those by-elections. As stated earlier, Terrebonne is just one of 3 by-elections taking place today. The other 2 are in the city of Toronto. It begins in the downtown riding of University Rosedale. Once represented by former Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland, it is now being contested by 10 candidates. They include Conservative Don Hodgson, New Democrat Serena Purdy, Green candidate Andrew Massey, with the Liberals hoping Dr. Danielle Martin will carry the day for the government. Now, shifting over to the eastern suburbs of Toronto and the riding of Scarborough Southwest, once represented by the former Defence and Public Safety Minister Bill Blair, there are 8 hopefuls in this race, with Conservative Diana Filipova, New Democrat Fatima Shaban, Green candidate Pooja Malhotra, and the former Deputy Leader for the Ontario NDP, Dolly Begum, now running under a Liberal banner. Popular wisdom would suggest these Toronto ridings will safely stay in the Liberal column, but politics is always full of surprises, so we are watching. Well, with more on the by-elections and what they could mean for Ottawa, we're now joined by Michele Cadario, Executive Vice President at Rubicon Strategy. Michele was also Deputy Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Paul Martin. Michele, thank you for making the time for us.
Happy to be here.
Listen, we don't know how things will shape up, but if, as I said, conventional wisdom holds, the governing Liberals will end this night with at least 173 seats in the House of Commons. How important is that 173 versus only getting a technical minority of 172?
Well, it makes quite a bit of difference because of the speaker, right? So the speaker comes from the Liberal benches. So even if a 172 tie, speaker comes off, and then you're down kind of 1 vote. So, and in the event of a tie, then the speaker, the tradition is that you stay with status quo. So, it's always more comfortable to have a majority than not. And I think that the larger it is, the more comfortable that the government will be.
Mm-hmm. Still, the government would not be in this position had those, 5 floor crossers not crossed, actually stayed loyal to their original parties. And at the end of the day, Canadians did vote for a minority government. Wouldn't government policy be better, stronger, if, it reflected the political choices Canadians made in the last election?
Well, let's be clear. Canadians decided that pro-growth parties, people who were going to invest in defense, people who were going to be getting things built, got about 87% of the votes in the last election. If you're talking about the Conservative and the Liberal vote combined, I think what Canadians care about most is getting things done. I think that they are far less concerned about what the machinations or they one up, one down, or how the numbers kind of crunch down in Ottawa. They want to see, are you making my life more affordable? Are you making sure that we have a job? Are you positioning Canada so that we can actually export our goods and services? And are we driving and starting a new industrial base? I think that's what Canadians are asking about, and I think that's what Canadians are most concerned about. And I suspect that given, the polling results, which, it's not every single one seems to say right now that they very much support Mark Carney and the direction he's taking the country. In fact, that's overwhelming. And his numbers are higher than they were even in the election. So, you can't necessarily rule just by polling, but I don't see any hue and cry from the Canadian public. And, actually, there's 3 ridings that are having their say tonight. And I think that if there was some kind of a groundswell of upset about floor crossing or this government, we've seen many, many times before. Canadians know how to make themselves known. Let's remember LaSalle-Mard. Let's remember St. Paul in by-elections not that long ago.
Mm-hmm. So what do you expect a majority will actually mean when it comes to government policy? If these are the concerns as you outlined amongst Canadians, do you think we're going to see things done quicker with the majority?
Not really, because again, you're talking about like a very slim majority and versus a very slim minority. One person gets sick, or they're out of the country and can't vote, then you're back in very close territory. Plus, I don't think that there's any change to the government agenda. And right now, the Conservative Party has said that, on those areas where they agree, they want to actually see progress, recognizing that that's what Canadians want as well. So I don't think that that's true. I don't think that there will be that much change in the short term. However, it does mean that I think you would see less, gerrymandering perhaps, or just obstructionism from the opposition if they choose to take that path. And to be fair to them right now, that's not the path they're choosing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, if the government does secure a majority tonight, it will mean a bigger caucus, but also a more varied caucus that includes blue Liberals, progressive Liberals, former Conservatives, former New Democrats. How challenging will that be for the Prime Minister and his office to manage? Because there is a danger of MPs, getting bored or resentful if they feel that they're not heard or they're being underutilized.
Well, it's really important when the Liberals are at such a high that you do the groundwork now, that you build the relationships. And I talk about this all the time, that the Prime Minister, that ministers, that the people in the Prime Minister's office build relationships with caucus members so that they know what their concerns are, they know what their priorities are, and that they feel listened to, that there are ways for them to get their points across, and that they feel that the Prime Minister listens to them. And that's going to be really important because you want to figure that out in the good times so that you can rely upon it when in the not so good times. And we all know that as great as it is now, if you are a Liberal and you're part of that caucus, inevitably there's going to be some bumpy times down the road.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Listen, Michele, always appreciate it. Thank you for the time this evening.
Great to be here.
That's Michele Cadario. Well, today's by-elections were also a topic of conversation during the Liberal National Convention, taking place last week at Montreal's Palais de Congrès, not far from the riding of Terrebonne, where both Liberal and Bloc Québécois members have been campaigning in hopes of getting a win. Take a listen to what some prominent Liberals had to say about the Terrebonne by-election. Here now are Karina Gould, Liberal Chair of the Commons Finance Committee, Mark Miller, the Minister for Canadian Identity and Culture, and Marco Mendicino, former Public Safety Minister in the Trudeau government and former Chief of Staff to the current Prime Minister, Mark Carney.
Well, look, I mean, I never want to count our chickens until they hatch, right? And so we always have to see what happens on election day. I think, as you said, we have a good feeling about certainly the 2 Toronto by-elections, but we need to see what that actually results in on Monday. Look, we have been a pretty effective parliament, particularly since this year. And when I say this year, I mean like 2026. If you had asked me last fall, I would have said that was one of the most dysfunctional parliaments I've ever been a part of. And so therefore, a majority government felt like it was really necessary and important in order to get the government's agenda through. But the government's been working really well with the opposition since the beginning of this year. I think the Conservatives see the polls and they don't want an election right now, and so they're willing to collaborate and work with the government. I mean, as chair of the Finance Committee, we got the Budget Implementation Act through, which is the legislation that enables the budget with no obstruction from the opposition whatsoever. And so the government has been functioning really well, and Parliament has been functioning really well since January. Now, in a minority, that can change at any moment, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think what a majority does is it provides some kind of certainty, some stability, both for the government and Parliament, but more than anything for Canadians. We are in a fraught world right now. There is so much uncertainty. There is so much instability. There's so much volatility. And I think what Canadians want, and certainly what I hear from people in my constituency and from around the country, is we want stability right now. We don't want to be in this moment where, things are uncertain in our own country. And I think it speaks to what the Prime Minister keeps saying, is that, as Canadians, there's a lot we can't control, but we can control our response, our reaction, what we're doing internally. And I think that stability is really important for our country and for Canadians in such an unpredictable world.
Beyond stability, can it expedite the government agenda? Because, Mark Carney did campaign on getting things done at a speed never seen before in Ottawa. And it seems, certainly last fall, things were caught up at the committee level, has moved in this winter period. But last fall, it was getting caught up at the committee level. Would it expedite projects and priorities for this government, do you think?
In some ways it will. I mean, look, if there's a majority, there's an opportunity to reset the committee structure in Parliament. That will be up to the Prime Minister to decide how he would like to do that. And certainly having a majority on committee means that the government can usually get its agenda through much better. But again, it's going to be a very slim majority, unless something else happens that I'm not aware of, but it's going to be a very, very slim majority. And so that will enable things, so long as committees are restructured, to get things through committee at a faster clip, potentially. But as I said, since January, we haven't seen that much obstruction in committees, and so things have been going very well. But in a minority, you're always beholden to the opposition and what they want to do, right? We don't have a majority on committees. And so if the Bloc and the Conservatives decide that they want to do something else, there's really not much the Liberals can do about that.
Do you think your party stands a good chance of winning Terrebonne on Monday?
I'm not taking anything for granted. I don't think we had historically ever won a poll in Terrebonne, or at least any sort of extrapolation of the popular vote. It is difficult. There's been a big turnout for the advanced polls, double what we were seeing in the other ridings in Toronto. I'm hopeful, but I think our teams are taking nothing for granted, and we're really putting on a full court press. And if we win it, it's fair and square, and if we don't, that's fair and square too. But sort of very cautiously optimistic.
Okay, cautiously optimistic. As you say, there are 2 other by-elections taking place in Toronto. The early predictions there indicate that they're going to be Liberal wins. Again, take nothing for granted. We don't know what's going to happen. But if those are Liberal wins, those 2 alone will push this government into majority territory. How important is Terrebonne if a majority is accomplished with those 2 other races?
Well, it's another voice for Quebec, and I think that's super important in the balance of things. I'm very competitive. I want to win all 3 of them. So, it'll be disappointing to me if we don't win all 3. Sort of can understand it, but we're taking 0-0 for granted.
We are now on the precipice of by-elections as you and I speak, 2 in Toronto, 1 in Terrebonne, here in the Montreal-area. It looks like this party will have a majority once those by-elections are done. Does that put to rest any talk of an early election? Because right now, Liberals have not enjoyed this level of support. I don't know in history, when you look at the polls where the party is right now, do those by-elections put to bed any idea of an early election, do you think?
The Prime Minister's been very consistent that he is very dedicated to making this Parliament work, which means working with the opposition parties, finding common ground where he can. And just by way of example, again, Bill C-5, which we introduced and passed last spring when I was his chief of staff, he was able to reach across the aisle with Conservatives and get them to pass that important legislation, which will help us accelerate the approval of energy projects that are in the national interest. We've got 3 by-elections, you're quite right, that are coming up. 2 in the Toronto area, Scarborough Southwest and University Rosedale. 2 very, very strong candidates there. And then Terrebonne. And so Terrebonne is, I think, a much more competitive race. We'll see. But I think regardless of the outcome, and, I think we're cautiously optimistic. You take nothing for granted. He's going to keep working with all parliamentarians to get big things done. I think he's very focused on, it seems like he's very focused on governing.
And the polls in Terrebonne and the other 2 by-elections will close at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll have full reaction to it all here tomorrow. But for this Monday, I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. We'll see you on PrimeTime Politics tomorrow evening. Until then, take care.